Hello and welcome to Hope and a Future. Global Justice is so pleased to present to you this online forum on human trafficking prevention during this National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. I'm Sosamma Samuel-Burnett, founder and president of Global Justice, and I'm going to be serving as your moderator for this session. If you're joining us online, we want to welcome you, and we also want to let you know that for the best audiovisual experience, we encourage you to close your other programs on your computer. In addition, throughout this broadcast, you'll have an opportunity to interact with us with your questions and comments. Please just type them into the question bar, and we'll look forward to responding as we can throughout the broadcast and as time permits. This online forum is an opportunity for us to engage the community, local, national, and international community, on this issue of preventing human trafficking. Human trafficking has become among the top 3 crimes in the world. It is in every corner of the world, including local communities that we wouldn't expect. This is a crime that has affected many different age groups and many different sectors. And we ask that throughout this broadcast that you join us not only in learning more about human trafficking, but also praying over this issue and connecting other community members to this issue so that we have a network of people concerned, engaged, and willing to advocate. Throughout this program, we're going to be featuring 2 wonderful and passionate advocates who've been addressing this issue of human trafficking in various ways in various places around the globe. I'd like to take this moment to introduce our presenters to you now. So would you join me, Sarah Symons and Shane Grammer?
Hello.
Hi, Shane. Hello. Hi, Sarah. Good to have you both here.
Hi, Shane.
Well, Shane Grammer is with Shane Grammer Arts, and he is coming to us from Southern California, bright and sunny, hopefully today, Shane, and wonderful to see you. We're going to be talking with Shane a little bit later in the program about his artwork as well as his advocacy work on this issue, and we'll look forward to talking more about that in a moment. Sarah Symons is coming to us from Florida, another sunny place, but I heard it's a little chilly today. Sarah is a human rights advocate who has been focusing on this issue of human trafficking through her organization, Her Future Coalition, and we'll be talking more with her in a moment as well. Both of these advocates are going to be demonstrating to us that advocacy comes in all sorts of forms and in all sorts of locations, and it will be exciting and interesting for each of us to engage with them in this work. We'll be encouraging you to check out their websites and to learn more about their work following this program. And as I mentioned, for our online audience, you can ask questions of Shane and of Sarah throughout the broadcast by just entering your comment or question in the question bar. So now I want to start off with Sarah Symons. Shane, we'll be back to you momentarily. Sarah, welcome. It is a joy to have you with us, and I should share with everyone that Her Future Coalition is a very special organization to Global Justice because we partner on something called the Global Market, and we've had a chance to feature these beautiful wares that Her Future Coalition presents, and I'll share with you a little bit later some of those items. But Sarah, I want to hear, before we hear all the information about Her Future, a little more of your story. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to this place before you started doing all this work with Her Future Coalition.
Well, it was certainly not a planned journey, but it was, I guess, synchronicity and kind of miraculous how it all fell into place. About 20 years ago, I had a very different kind of life as a composer of music for film and television. I was living on Cape Cod, and my kids were very small. And one of my songs got featured in a film at the Tribeca Film Festival. So I went to New York to see that film. And while I was there, I saw an incredible documentary, which for the first time, I learned about human trafficking and the horror of it. It was not well known at that time. You know, as you know, the awareness of it has really been growing in the last decade, but back then I really hadn't heard of it before, let alone knowing, you know, the scale that it was affecting people and that it was affecting the most vulnerable people in our world. And I was very moved by this film and by the courage of the people profiled in it who were taking action against slavery all over the world. And not all of them were professionals or development people. They were all kinds of regular people like myself, and they had just seen what was happening and decided to stand in the way and do something about it. And so I was inspired by them to join them, and made the decision that day to dedicate the rest of my life to working on this issue.
That's so remarkable, Sarah. Now you're an artist, you're a filmmaker, you're a photographer. I think some of the photos behind you are your work, isn't it?
I wish I could take credit for everything you just said, but no, I'm not a filmmaker. I did music for film. So I would, sing songs that were the backgrounds of films. And these gorgeous photos were actually taken by some of the survivors in our program when we did a photography immersion workshop called Vision for Empowerment. But I am an artist. I obviously am a musician, but I'm also a visual artist, and most recently have really been enjoying creating these very elaborate collages depicting the women and some of the stories of the women that we work with.
And could you ever imagine that as this artist that you are, that you would eventually become this advocate, this human trafficking? Is that something that you would have imagined in your career path or in your plans for the future?
Definitely not. Definitely not. Again, my kids were very little, and I had my life on Cape Cod, and my husband was an investment banker. And I think we thought we had our life, pretty well figured out and going in the right direction. But when I started this work, it was just so compelling. And the more I got involved in it, first as a volunteer, and then, working for other organizations, and then starting our own organization. And then my husband left his banking job to help me and, help get this started. It's just every step led to the next. And even when I found out about the issue and said I'm going to get involved, I didn't really imagine what would happen, which is that, kind of gave up my art career and took on this completely different role. And, there was a steep learning curve. I had a lot to learn, both about the issue and about, running an organization, all the aspects of leadership and human resources. And I learned from our local partners more than anything. It was very important to me not to be coming in with, an attitude of like, oh, I know what to do and we're going to fix this for you. When we're coming into other countries, our organization works in India and Nepal. We've worked in other Asian countries over the years, but primarily India and Nepal. And there is a very established, long established anti-trafficking movement there that started in 1949, as I'm sure you know. So I believe you have a South Asian heritage. So their movement is very well established, and there's just these incredible people, men, but mostly women, who have been working on this for decades, and there was so much to learn from them. And so when we started, knowing that I knew very little, I reached out to them and have all along the way learned from them and attempted, rather than reinventing the wheel, to add resources to the wheel.
That's really great insight, Sarah. And I think especially for advocates who are starting new initiatives and organizations in this cause, it's important to remember sort of the principles that you shared. Now that we have a little bit of your background, I'd love to hear more about your work, Her Future Coalition. Give us a little bit of a description of what you do, what your priorities are, what is the cause?
Our work is to help survivors of human trafficking and other severe forms of gender-based violence to gain all the tools that they need to be able to rebuild their lives and take charge of their futures, and to rejoin society in whatever way meets their own gifts and interests. For one person, that might be going to college, and for another person, that might be becoming an accountant or a chef or a mom or working at the mall, or whatever it is that they want to do for their life. Our goal is to identify their individual goals and dreams and help them achieve that. And it's a very long-term commitment, working with survivors. Obviously, the trauma is so extreme, and we like to walk alongside people for at least 2 years, but more often it's 5 years, and in some cases now, 10 years and more, because there's so many steps. There's the recovering from the trauma, and then there's getting some kind of education or vocational training. There's learning to live independently after you've been in a shelter for some period of time, or moving out of the red light area and kind of breaking those chains that might be internal as much as external. So we try to walk alongside people throughout their journey to freedom. And we also have this same model really, for the most high risk women and children. We identify that as, people who are imminently at risk of being trafficked. Either they are born into a brothel community, born into intergenerational slavery, they're living in a border village where trafficking has become normalized and there's a high rate of trafficking. There's multiple vulnerabilities at play here, perhaps poverty, natural disasters, death of a parent, membership in a minority or tribal group. And so they have, multiple vulnerabilities, or a mother or sister has already been trafficked. So we identify those girls, and again, really same model, trying to give them all the tools so that they can identify what they want out of life beyond exploitation, and then help them to achieve it.
Great. And it's a remarkable work that you're doing. And, for our audience, because we do have, a range of audience members, we want to make sure that they're understanding what human trafficking is. Would you give them a sense of what does that mean to you? What does that term mean for our community?
It means that, I think a lot, let's just, define what it doesn't mean. It does not mean the film Taken.
Yeah.
It generally does not involve someone being kidnapped off the street, even, in these vulnerable communities. It's very rarely like that. Usually there is the involvement of a family member, a neighbor, a husband or something like that. But basically a person is either tricked or forced or coerced into a situation where they are no longer in control of any aspect of their life. In our case, we have done a lot of work with brothel slavery, but also to a lesser extent with people who've been trafficked into domestic work. And there are some other organizations which do fantastic work around industrial slavery and brickwork and mining and things like that, which we have done only minimally, been involved in. But a big value for me is it takes teamwork to make the dream work. And there's so many ways to attack this, and we need to work together and kind of identify what our own area of expertise is, but also continually collaborate with others. Sorry, that was a little off target. But anyway, I feel like the person has been either forced, defrauded, tricked into a situation where they lose control over where they live, what they do for work, their sexuality, their health, what they eat, every aspect of their life. And usually, but not always, are earning no money. But sometimes they may be earning a little bit of money, but they've still lost control of multiple other areas of their life.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that people do understand those two elements. One, that there's so many different ways that you can be trafficked, and it's not just simply a kidnapping. And oftentimes, especially when you're dealing with sexual trafficking, you're dealing with people that are very close to you. You mentioned it could be a parent, often a mom. It could be a distant friend. It could be a lot of people that are in your circles. But that is one element that I think is important for people to know. The other is something you also mentioned, which is this whole idea that it's for different purposes. So it can be sexual exploitation, it can be all sorts of labor. And I think the statistic says it's about 50-50. About 50% of human trafficking is for sexual exploitation, and about 50% for these other purposes. So it's a really interesting and terrible, horrific, crime. Now, you are working specifically in Asia, and you mentioned your focus has been in India, Nepal. What brought you to those particular countries, and how did you start working in those areas?
Well, what brought me there was I had seen a film which focused on the trafficking of Nepali girls into Indian brothels. And so really not knowing much else about the issue, I started by reaching out to the groups featured in that film. And I'm so blessed and grateful that they took the time to allow me the opportunity to be involved, as a volunteer for them, and then later working with them, and then later, starting my organization and partnering with them. So that part was, perhaps, more coincidental, but why I continue to focus on those areas is that South Asia really is an epicenter, if not the epicenter, of human slavery. So the most recent report from the UN and Walk Free Foundation estimated about 40 million people living in slavery, and somewhere between 12 and 18 million of the 40 million are in India alone. And that's not even counting, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and other countries immediately surrounding that. It has a huge slavery problem, and including, all the forms of slavery we've talked about, and a few we haven't, such as forced begging and organ, sale of organs. So it has with a bit 1.4 billion people and, you know, these millions of people in slavery, lots of work, good work to do. We're not going to run out of, you know, people to work with and help. But also really what I love about working in South Asia and working on this issue in South Asia is that the issue really responds well to intervention.
Hmm.
You know, there are many issues which are so intractable and so hard, and you just don't even know where to start. But child trafficking isn't one of them.
Hmm.
Girl trafficking, you know, even working with adult women, these are people, if you give them an inch, they will run a mile, you know, and they'll carry 3 other people along with them.
Hmm.
And this is an issue that thrives in secrecy, in silence, and in shame. And as soon as we shine a light on it, bringing awareness to it, it gets better. It immediately responds. And the people who are in it are desperate for any kind of help and support and open to a variety of approaches. And I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff work. And so I've been really excited and encouraged and motivated all along the years by the fact that our efforts in partnership with local organizations bear fruit. We get to see every day the fruit of our labors. And, you know, some of the girls are, we have a girl in medical school, we have, you know, a girl in graduate school in Australia. We've got lots of girls who've gotten married and have become amazing parents that are creating a completely different future for their daughters and sons. And all kinds of different careers. We have girls who are leadership within our own organization. And recently I had the great joy of writing a book with one of our survivors. Her name
Awesome.
is Anjali. She was trafficked at age 12 from a village in Nepal, very similar to the stories in the film that originally got me involved. And I met her right after she was rescued in 2009. And I've been working with her ever since. And she has become a daughter to me and now also a partner and co-author.
Wow.
And we've written this book, Standing in the Way, which talks a lot about the vulnerabilities, how trafficking happens, what happens, but then also talks a lot about healing and what are the elements that were in place that enabled her to heal. And now to go back to her village, and she's right now back in the village. She moved back last month and is constructing a school, and is going to be really saving the next generation of girls in her village, which has a trafficking rate of 75%. Trafficking
Wow.
has become so normalized in the community. The best thing about my work is Anjali and all the Anjalis, seeing, you know, not the work I've done, but the work they do, it multiplies. And it's really energizing and exciting every time one of them steps into her own power.
Mhm. Amazing. You know, you've mentioned several references to the different types of projects and programs and things you provide, but walk us through a little bit of the big picture. You know, you said earlier on about this idea that, you know, when someone's rescued, they need things to be able to sustain them, right? Sustain them economically and socially. And that's a lot of what Her Future Coalition does, is provide that kind of restoration. So walk us through a little bit of your programs and projects. How does that work when someone is rescued from a brothel in India, and what happens next?
Mm, it's a great question. So we are not involved in rescue. That is done primarily by local groups for obvious reasons. So we engage with girls either immediately after rescue, when they're typically in a rescue shelter, or before they're trafficked, as I said, in the prevention programs in the red light areas and border areas. So once we start working with a girl, we try to identify what is her path forward. If it's a young child, obviously they don't have as much choice. They need to go to school. And so we have education programs that serves about 350 girls. We build, expand, and support shelters, shelter care, because obviously a person needs a safe place.
Mhm.
And our shelter program includes residential shelters for long-term care for rescued girls, but it also includes our red light drop-in centers, which are just open until midnight. And those are for girls who are sharing one room of a brothel with their mother and are in extreme danger if they're not in a safe place when their mother is seeing clients. And
Mhm.
then the third pillar is vocational training and employment for those that, you know, either are older and don't want to go back to school, or they've completed as much education as they want to and can. Then we work on vocational training and solutions for them.
Awesome. Well, you know, as you're sharing that, I want to also share with our audience the Her Future Coalition has a wonderful and beautiful website, and I'd like to share a little bit of that website with you. And as we're sharing this, what I'd like to do is, I mean, we won't be going through the entire website in our time together, but I encourage you to visit Her Future Coalition, and you'll see in front of you right now a little bit of information about the organization, different things that they do, some of the references that Sarah mentioned to education, shelter, entrepreneurship. And I want to also focus on the fact that throughout this website, they help us to understand some of the elements, why education is important, why we need this economic independence for these individuals. I want to also point you to some of these stats. And maybe, Sarah, you can walk us through these stats that you see here on the page now.
Sure. So over the course of the years, we've been able to help about 4,000 women and girls on their journey to freedom. And but because our programs are fairly intensive and long term, at any one time we work with about 750 girls. And we do it, as I said, through local partnership. That is still an enduring value and a huge priority for us, even though we now have our own staff. When we first started, partnership was my only option because I lived in Cape Cod and I had 2 little kids. But now we have our own wonderful staff, but we still really, really believe in the power of collaborating. So we have 10 partners, which, you know, some of them are rescue shelters. One of them is a rescue organization that actually conducts rescue. Some of them are, you know, red light centers or, you know, red light community groups. One of them is a school in the urban slums. One of them is Anjali's school, which we call the Freedom School. She has a different name for it in Nepali, but we call it the Freedom School, which is just underway. And one child is all it takes to create change. By that, we mean that there is a multiplying effect. You know, this is true of women in every cause. If you help a woman, you're on the average, you know, changing the lives and uplifting the lives of 3 or 4 other people, because women, you know, teach others to fish and clean up the pond and do all that stuff. But with, you know, we're working with survivors. This is a systemic issue. Everybody comes from a family or a community where others are at risk. There's nobody who just, you know, randomly got trafficked in our programs. And so by helping that woman or girl to learn about her human rights and develop her life so that she can become a leader in her family and community, you're also creating change in the community and in the society at large. And I certainly wouldn't take credit for the social change that's been happening in India over the last decade, but I feel joyful to be a small part of it and to be like riding the crest of it. You know, there were some really horrific rape cases that, you know, gained attention over the last few years. And as appalling and unbearable as those were, they did get people to their feet. And it really created a wave of powerful activism and, you know, feminist and human rights movements that rose up, and things are changing. Things are really changing for the better. We're benefiting from that. Our girls are benefiting from that. And I think that every, you know, drop of water we can add to that is a wonderful thing. And the drops of water we're adding are the women and girls that we serve, who then become the change makers.
That's awesome. Now, as we are, you know, kind of collecting all this information, getting to know Her Future Coalition, I encourage our audience to visit herfuturecoalition.org. I also encourage you to come and visit Her Future Coalition to see some of the beautiful items they make. As you mentioned earlier, you know, these individuals end up learning trades. And I want to share that, you know, the earrings I'm wearing today, this beautiful bracelet I have on today. Yes, you too. These are all Her Future Coalition items. They're made beautifully by these survivors and high quality. Tell us a little bit why you are helping these individuals learn this trade of making jewelry and why that's so important in their restoration.
So one of the groups that's a little bit harder to help is girls who have been rescued at a later age, and maybe they don't want to go back and start kindergarten at age 16. You know, often have very little primary school education or maybe low literacy and high trauma. And that's a harder group to think of solutions for, and it's hard for them to think of solutions for themselves. Typically what nonprofits have done, with some success, you know, is traditionally female trades such as sewing and hairdressing and cooking and, you know, And we do some of that. There's nothing wrong with all of that, but we were really looking to also explore careers that are traditionally done only by men, and
Mhm.
which, because they're done by men, tend to be a bit more respected and definitely better paid. So we started our goldsmithing program in 2010, and it really has been a great solution for that population of girls who aren't able to, rejoin society through, more traditional academic paths. It's also super therapeutic to take a piece of metal and bang on it, and
Mhm.
out of a square of, total blase square of metal, to create something of beauty. And it really is a metaphor for, how much transformation they too have experienced in their lives. So it's
Mhm.
been very successful. Those girls earn an income comparable to a college graduate, and they make gorgeous jewelry. They design it. It's all hand fabricated in sterling silver, and we're so grateful to have a partnership with Global Justice, because we need partners. As I said, teamwork makes the dream work, and really appreciate your helping us in that way.
Well, it has been a joy to partner. And for those of you who are watching, you can visit our website at www.globaljusticeonline.org, and you'll see a tab for global market, or you can go directly to that page at /global G.L.B.A.L market MRKT, and you could see the range of items that are from Her Future Coalition, as well as other organizations that are doing related and wonderful work around the world. Now, we had talked about these various jewelry items that we're wearing. I want to share with you all in our audience a few of the items that are from Her Future Coalition. So these are some of the beautiful wares that they have. These necklaces and earrings and bracelets are made from silver and brass, and just beautiful, beautiful craftsmanship in all of these items. So these are just a few. We'll show a few more. These are some earrings that are also available now in our global market. And I encourage you to come and visit the global market so that you can pick them up. Now, for most of us that are working in this arena, we see the value in purchasing items that are coming from these individuals who are survivors and creating them. Not everyone completely understands the idea behind it. For us at the global market, and I know certainly for you at Her Future Coalition, it's not about buying a product, right? It's about supporting a life, supporting a life that is trying to be sustainable, and one that can't survive without its own livelihood and its own capacities. So I just really appreciate the time that you have shared, and the effort that you have put into this advocacy initiative to be able to bring freedom to these people in India. You mentioned earlier, Sarah, that I'm from South Asia. Well, I was born in India, right? And so while I care for the globe, there's a certain special part of my heart for India, of course, and it's a place of tremendous population. It will soon become the most populated place in the world, but it also has tremendous poverty, and so that means vulnerabilities. And so I want to talk a little bit about ways that the community can support your work, whether it's in India or whether it's in Nepal. What are ways that they can become more knowledgeable? What are ways that they can support the different programs that you're doing?
Well, in addition to the one, you listed, which is to shop for these products at Global Market. And do you also still have them at Grace Place Church, or is that?
Our on-site market is at Grace Place Church in Berthoud, Colorado, and we also have an online store that you can access through our website for a range of those same items.
Okay, so that is obviously one great way to help, because especially as these girls get older, they don't want or need charity. They really want, the means to be self-supporting and self-sustaining. But obviously for the younger kids, for the shelter programs, we do need and we subsist on people's generosity and donations. And so, if people would like to consider that, would be very, very grateful for your support in any amount. If you want to learn more, the book that Anjali and I just wrote, is really designed. It's not, I promise you, it's not devastating or graphic. She really wanted to focus on the healing, on the vulnerabilities that caused this, and then the healing that came after. So that is the focus of the book. It's called Standing in the Way. It's available on Amazon. So I would really invite people to check that out, to learn more about our work and how it works. And finally, to engage with us on social media. We really, we really are growing that aspect of our work, the communication side. You have an amazing woman, Caroline, who creates gorgeous media, and we really would appreciate people joining and interacting with us there.
That's wonderful. And, you know, as you mentioned, there's many ways. I mean, some of you may want to buy the book. I just flashed that on the screen here so you have an idea of the cover and look for that. And we want to encourage you also to consider, you know, purchasing a gift through the Global Market or a Her Future Coalition directly. We also want to encourage you to get to know these topics. It is important to know that the issues that we face here in our country are not totally unlike what you see and experience in other countries. And so when we learn about what's happening in India or Nepal, you're also learning to a large extent what could be happening here in the United States. Sarah Symons, I'm so grateful for all that you're doing. I'm going to continue this conversation with you shortly, but for the moment, I'd like to also give you a little bit of a break so that we can have a chance to introduce our other presenter, Shane Grammer. So Shane, would you join us? And Sarah will bring you back in just a few minutes. So as you've heard from Sarah Symons and the work that she's doing globally, we also want to introduce Shane Grammer, remarkable work here on the local and national level. So Shane Grammer, we are so pleased to have you as our dear friend, but we also are pleased to have you as a board director for Global Justice. And as you know, Create Justice is one of our projects where we really emphasize the arts and how the arts can really bring light and bring attention to this whole area of human trafficking and other injustices. And you have personally taken upon yourself to start pursuing this type of advocacy. So we're going to talk about your work and how it relates to human trafficking in a moment, but I want to start with your story. Tell me a little bit about you, Shane, your background before you came into this arena of advocacy on human trafficking. Let us know a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And, you know, Sarah, it was great hearing your background and your story as well. So it's amazing what you're doing. Yeah, you know, my I do a lot of different things, but a lot of my background is design and fabrication in the theme park industry. So they call them scenic shops that do all the fabrication of large scale sculptures that you'd see in a theme park or an attraction. And so that's a lot of my background, working with large teams of artists, artisans, designers. But what really got me to pursue artwork right out of high school professionally was my love for graffiti. Growing up in a small town of Chico, California, there was no hip hop, graffiti, street art, or anything like that. But I saw a documentary in 1991 called Style Wars that documented the street graffiti art on subway train cars in New York, and it just blew my mind. And that started me on that pursuit of, you know, how can I do this professionally as an artist.
And,
Yeah.
you know, kind of a similar question as I asked Sarah. So, you know, you're this artist, you've done this work with the theme parks, you do these sculptures, you're definitely a creative person. So how did you go from that kind of creativity to using it for advocacy?
Yeah, and what I've told a lot of people is over time is I've kind of been this guy, you know, since I was in high school. I went to a church that had a strong emphasis on world missions, and I'm very grateful for that. My first missions trip was an orphanage in Mexico in Tijuana, and I didn't go down there to paint a mural. I wasn't thinking art, but everyone knew me as a creative person and said, "Hey, Shane, will you paint a mural?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And that kind of opened that door when I saw how people responded to that mural. And then since then, over the years, you know, I've worked in inner city San Francisco with youth on Sixth and Mission and the Tenderloin, and doing kind of graffiti type murals to bring hope and joy to people. Been to Peru, painted in a church in a remote area. No one will ever see it, you know, except that village. Multiple churches or orphanages throughout Mexico. And then I painted in a school in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and spoke to students there. And then when I got introduced to the whole issue of trafficking, I ended up in 2010 going to Swipe, Cambodia, and painting with Agape International Missions.
Well, you know, it's amazing how that progression has been in your life, that you've always had sort of this heart for this and then this artistic ability and how it's kind of evolved. More recently, you even did some outdoor art in a very unique way. in Paradise, California. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how your artwork touched people in that context.
Yeah, I love out of the box type of art. I love street art. I follow street artists. I'm always looking for artists that are doing things a little bit different or, out of the box. And there's a lot of photographers, especially, that love to shoot in abandoned locations. And there are some artists that will paint in abandoned locations. And I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. And I started pursuing that. I don't want, unless if I'm working with a client and I'm painting in a corporate office, that's completely different. But when I'm out painting for myself, I want a back alley that is in a red light district, or I want something that an abandoned water park, or something like that. I'm looking for places like that to paint. I think there's this. I find it fascinating about there's a narrative that you bring when you create something beautiful in an area that's fully destructive, just and a mess. And that led to Paradise. So growing up in Chico, Paradise is 18 minutes up the hill, up the mountain from Chico. And I started seeing posts on Facebook in 2018 of what was left of friends that I grew up with, of their homes. And there was nothing but chimneys or burnt cars. And it really struck me in a deep way. And I have a friend that we went to the same church, Shane and Jennifer Edwards. They did a post, and all that was left was their chimney. And as soon as I saw that chimney, I knew I needed to paint that. And started the communication. I communicated probably about a week or 2 weeks after the fire, but it was still way too early before they were letting civilians come back up. And then as soon as that happened, I went up and I painted this beautiful woman's face on this burnt chimney, and it went viral locally. And the locals labeled that mural "Beauty Among the Ashes."
And it was a powerful series that you did. And, it's interesting now that, the work that you did in Cambodia, really highlighting these issues of human trafficking, the work that you did in Paradise kind of came together in some ways in the work that you're doing presently through your new organization, Hope Through Art. Tell us a little bit about Hope Through Art. What are its purposes? What do you hope to see happening with this effort that you have in this organization?
Yeah, with all the projects that I was, talking about from 19 till, this point, and Paradise was, I literally have had about a dozen people fall in my arms and weep from Paradise, because the murals, I ended up, after that mural and the success of that mural bringing hope to so many people that lost everything, I ended up doing 20 murals over 2019. And some art installations throughout the area. But I witnessed for the first time in my life that this art deeply moved people from this area emotionally. And I heard stories from somebody that decided they weren't going to move back to Paradise and rebuild, but because of the murals, it showed them that somebody from the outside really cared, and they decided to rebuild. Just the fact that they created this organic community throughout the area. There would be locals looking at a mural, and then somebody from New York would show up to shoot photography. And then they would build a relationship and find out that there's more, and they'd go see them together, over the next few days. To me, that was an amazing miracle that happened. So that in answering your question, I just felt like I had to start a foundation and continue to do projects like this using highly creative art to bring hope to people that are devastated or brokenhearted. And in 2000 last year, 2020 December, is when we launched Hope Through Art Foundation.
Awesome. And Hope Through Art Foundation works on a variety of justice issues, but one of the key ones is anti-human trafficking. And most recently, you did your first installation through Hope Through Arts, right? And tell us a little bit about that installation and kind of what your hopes are with sharing this artwork with the community in this very unique way.
Yeah, I try to keep my vision or my purpose very simple. I'm a creative guy. I love to just create, and I want to create something beautiful. Again, something that will move people, touch them emotionally. There's been a lot of organizations that fight trafficking in different ways that I've done work for. I've either painted live at a black tie event or donated artwork, painted murals for them, different types of things like that. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought just because there's so much I'm trying to tell you.
So the art installation, how that was sort of inspired.
Yeah, so in that, I communicating, I simply wanted to create an art installation that was super powerful, moved people emotionally, but also few of the organizations that I've worked with, I wanted to draw attention to trafficking and also the organizations that are doing all the work, all the hard work on a day-to-day basis, which is Agape International Missions. I Empathize are based in Santa Monica, Mercy Multiplied based in Nashville, and City of Refuge, SAC, in Oak Park, Sacramento. And these are all organizations that I've done something with. So I wanted to use a powerful visual art installation to draw attention to them, but also remind people that, hey, there is this major issue. And here's some steps, here's some organizations you can go after to find more and help or do something.
And those are all remarkable organizations. We're blessed at Global Justice to have Don and Bridget Brewster of Agape International Mission involved with our board, and they are doing remarkable work in Cambodia, but also expanding that work around the globe. And then these other organizations you mentioned are doing tremendous efforts on the local level, whether it's in Sacramento or other parts of California or parts of the country. So I think for all of our audience members, we want you to know that this fight to fight human trafficking happens at every level. And I think you captured that in a lot of the work that you've already done. We want to take a moment to introduce this beautiful new installation that Shane has put together just this month. This is a very special sort of unveiling for us to see this video that highlights the work and then the final product. So I'm going to ask our audience in a moment to just pay attention to the screen as we share this wonderful video.
I am intelligent. I am beautiful. I can achieve great and mighty things. That's what my daddy always used to say. But when you told me that I was beautiful, all you saw was a sway in my back, in my hips, and my lips, and the parts and pieces of me. You never saw all of me, but I saw all of you. I saw the gold in you, and I accepted that as a treasure, and I opened my heart to you. I was the first one to say, I love you. But the way you loved me wasn't the way my daddy taught me. The way you loved me was just a parts and pieces of me. You never saw the intelligence in me. You saw that I would be good on the dance floor and good to make you a prophet. Our prophets. You saw me no different than you saw money added to your bank account. But I did that, not you. You never saw me. And so I have to tell you today that I see you. I see the secrets that I never saw before. Because the labels you put on me, I take them and throw them on the floor today. To Today I'm no longer your prophet. Today I'm no longer your girl, part of your stable. Today I'm the woman who I was created for. Today I'm gonna walk back in my freedom. Today I will be seen not for what I can do, but for who I am. I am a woman. I'm intelligent. And I'm not the one who just ran to the let go of 1, 2, 3. I can't count anymore of the kids that will never call me mom. Because I did plan B. I didn't take on the original identity, but today I take my first step and I take it back. So you don't have to see me anymore. Let it be my secret weapon, and all you see is the back of me, because I'm walking to my future and to my freedom. I'm set free today, no longer a part of you.
Shane, this is such a remarkably beautiful, beautiful artwork, and it moves me in watching this video. It's just so beautiful. But I would love to have you share from your artistic perspective your inspiration for this particular vision, this particular image, and the message that you're trying to get across with what you produced here.
Yeah, there was a spoken word in there, and that's a gal from my church down here in LA, and she poses as a younger girl for a couple organizations online, and will actually do sting operations. And I sent her the concept before I executed the art installation, and she came up with that spoken word, inspired by that, and so fabulous having her. It was a collaboration, and I love that. But I wanted this image of this younger girl to be out in the forest, and thank God provided snow. It was so awesome.
Mm.
Just a sense of coldness and isolation, and the major narrative to the whole story is the transparency. And the name of the art installation is called Can You See Me? And this is my first project executed through Hope Through Art Foundation. And I think the image can be enough to pierce your soul. And I feel like this art installation did that. I wanted something that was hauntingly beautiful, that the image alone would make people emotional, and that has happened. So I'm very grateful for that as an artist. I had a lot of help hanging that up in the forest. It was a lot of work. I was exhausted. I'm the guy that weeps at rom-coms. You know, my wife and I have 3 girls, and this whole issue emotionally hits me in a very deep way. And that comes out in my artwork if I try to or not. It just comes out that way.
This is the image I'm sharing on the screen of Shane working in the forest. Now, what's amazing about this piece of art is that for most people, you're not going to be able to go and access this artwork, right? It's in a remote area. Most of us can't reach it, but the fact that we have this beautiful video representation, we get to share not only in the image, but in your process, in what you had to experience. I noticed at the beginning, it was misty and kind of rainy, and you had to kind of work through that. It really sort of, I think, illustrated the heartbreak, the tears that, you know, all of us have over this tragedy. But then at the end, you also have created this image that we see her right in the midst of that forest. So it's just beautiful. We want to thank you for sharing this beautiful, beautiful work with us. I want to also take a few minutes to take just some chances for people to get to know Hope Through Arts and how they can be supportive of you. So this is your first installation through this foundation, but what do you hope to continue to do, and how can the community get to know your work and this foundation better?
Yes, my hope right now through Hope Through Art Foundation is to do at least 4 to 6 projects a year. This project alone took a lot of planning, but it's not just trafficking. I want to go into low-income poverty areas and find youth, aspiring artists, and do mural projects with them to where it's educational. I spend a day with them and I teach them the business of art, and we leave them with documentation so that they can have that to learn how to deal with a client, how to create a concept and apply that to a wall. And then we do a mural together. And we already have projects like that we're working on in Paradise. And I want to do something in inner city LA right now. I also want to attack issues of homelessness. There's just so much out there right now. I mean, I just drove through Stockton, California, and the shanties that I saw under the bridges all over the place. I'm like, this is America. And I'm seeing that all through LA as well. But human trafficking alone, I mean, my ultimate goal is that I'm all over the world, that I'm going back to Cambodia and doing projects. I'm going to India. And then we want to have interns. So we're bringing in young people, youth, to work on these art installations together. So they're understanding the back end and how much work that really happens to execute something like that and make that happen. So right now we're totally new. We have hopethroughartfoundation.com, which is just a splash page right now. You can donate by going to hopethroughartfoundation.com on PayPal. Our Facebook page, we have a Facebook page with almost 800 followers right now. We just launched that. And then Instagram as well with a big 22 followers or something like that. But it's for us in Hope Through Art Foundation, it's about building a tribe of like-hearted people that want to move nations and move people and make incredible things happen through art and bring change.
Well, and Shane, you just highlighted something that's so important, that, things that start have to start. They don't start huge, right? It might be that 22 that'll eventually be 22,000, that could be 22 million. But the point is, it starts with just the one. So we want to encourage our audience to check out this wonderful organization, Hope Through Arts, to support Shane in his efforts and to also provide input. There might be inspiration for different things that are happening in your community that Shane and other artists might be able to engage in, and we want to bring all these sectors together. Part of our conversation today, when we're talking about human trafficking prevention, is this idea that for some it is direct advocacy, for others it could be something like art, but there's a wide variety of ways that people can inform and inspire people to be engaged in this fight. So thank you, Shane Grammer, so much for what you have shared in that beautiful video and your photo images. I want to bring back now Sarah Symons. And Sarah and Shane and I are going to have a conversation around not just what their work is, but this broader context of human trafficking and human trafficking prevention. And Shane, if you'd stay back with us as well, we'll have all three of us together. And I did want to mention to our audience, if you are joining us now or if you've joined us earlier, that you have an opportunity to engage with us in this conversation. On your screen is a question bar where you can type in your comments and questions. They can be directed to Sarah, to Shane, to myself. They can be related to the work that they've shared with you today, or it could be related to the broader topic of human trafficking prevention. Human trafficking prevention is a wide and huge area, just as human trafficking itself is a wide and huge issue. So we're going to take a few minutes to just start a conversation around ways that we can address this issue and trends that we're seeing, and we'll be watching for your questions as we go. But let me start off with an initial question, and maybe I'll start with Sarah and then work to Shane. But when you've both talked a little bit about how you first got to know about human trafficking, in Sarah's case, it was really seeing this film. Shane, you had other kinds of exposures. But once you became aware of this issue, how did you see this issue sort of expanding? I mean, what do you see as the connection between local, national, international human trafficking, Sarah?
You mean like how has it evolved and changed over the years since I've been involved, or how is my understanding of it expanded?
Yes. How has this topic sort of developed, and connected for you locally, nationally, internationally, as you started to become more aware and work on it?
Okay, that is a great question. First, I want to say, Shane, your art is so cool, and I love what you're doing, and I'm really so grateful to be introduced to it. Keep up the awesome work. It's really exciting what you're doing and really powerful. As for that question, I think for me, the biggest change has been in awareness, and it has been a positive trend. When I first got involved in this work, like, 18, 20 years ago, people didn't know the term human trafficking, and they thought I would be like drug trafficking or like traffic accidents. Now everybody knows what it is. So that is a very good step in the right direction. And everybody knows that it's happening, or most people seem to know that it's happening locally as well as globally, which is another positive trend. I think what we need to do is kind of connect the dots. And a lot of times, people find out you're working internationally, they're like, well, why aren't you working locally? Or vice versa. And I think that, it's just important to understand that there are so many entry points for this, and wherever you personally feel called to step in and get involved, it will be very great and very effective. And we just all need to work together. The vulnerabilities are so much more similar than they are different. That's what I've learned. Most of all, like when I first got involved from that film, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to work on sex trafficking of girls from India to Nepal. And as I got involved in doing that, I realized I couldn't separate human trafficking from any of the other issues these girls were facing. A lot of them had first been in a child marriage, or there was a natural disaster, an environmental issue that caused them to be trafficked. It was related to the low status of women in the society or some other issue. So really couldn't just address it in isolation. It needed to be addressed in the context of all of those other issues. And, in terms of preventing it, whether you're working, Colorado or, in China, wherever it is, I think it's about addressing the root causes and really looking at those vulnerabilities and getting in there. Like I think in the United States, at least in the movement, where people are pretty aware that kids coming out of foster care, aging out of foster care, are super, super high risk group. So, that would be a really great place to start for local efforts. It's like really honing in on that group, figuring out what they need to be safe and to feel, protected and nurtured as they age out of foster care. That's just one example.
Yeah, that's great. Shane, sort of similar question, as you became aware of this issue of human trafficking, how did that evolve for you in understanding sort of this local, national, international connection?
Well, my first involvement was a guy named Clayton Butler, a friend of mine that used to work with Agape International Missions, and he would speak at our church, and he came to our church in 2008. And during the day, the morning services, he would have what he'd call a PG message, and then he'd say, come back at night, and there's going to be a rated R message. And I had, as an artist, when I hear something or I see something visually, I just know instantly, like the chimney. I've got to paint that chimney. And same thing when Clayton was speaking, I'm like, I have to go there. I've got to do something. I had no idea about that issue at that time. And then you, Sarah, I mean, it's like the movie for you. It's as soon as you gather information and awareness about the issue, then it starts to kind of tumble in, more information, especially going to SWIPOC, Cambodia, and spending time with Don and Bridget Brewster, who are absolutely amazing people. But they're telling me stories. I'm going, I do not want to hear these stories. And I'm emotional. So I just want to create artwork, but then I start gathering information on domestic, and then I start working with other organizations. So I think it starts with a passion, a knowing that, hey, I've got to do something. I have to take a step. And in each step you take, you meet, build relationships with people, and then you find out where you fit. And that takes time too, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. And I think you both raised some really important points. Sarah, you mentioned this fact that, as you're getting engaged in this work, that there are these connectivities between what happens on a local level and national level and international, but that it's a both and. That, because you work globally, it doesn't mean that we're dismissing what's happening locally. We need advocacy on all levels, and oftentimes we need advocacy together in a collaborative way. And I think, Shane, you also mentioned that for people who feel that sort of kind of this discontent and this fire to do something, that if they really need to follow your lead, lean in to that passion, learn about what this topic is, and then start connecting with maybe an individual or an organization. It could start with a person, for example, that you mentioned at the church, and then moving forward from there. But the idea is to build that relationship and that network. We often hear from students, from professionals and others who just say, well, what can I do? Well, it really starts with being informed and then connecting with organizations like yourselves or with other organizations that we have mentioned as well. Now, you both have highlighted the fact that this issue is very difficult and challenging. And I mentioned earlier in this broadcast that human trafficking is listed as one of the top 3 worst crimes in the world. So the other are drug trafficking and arms trafficking, and they juggle back and forth between which is 1, 2, and 3. Human trafficking is predicted to become 1, if not already. It is very difficult to track, obviously, in terms of numbers, but some of the low numbers are that it has an industry value. It's about $150 billion industry, and that's what is known. So imagine what is not known. It is also something that we've mentioned earlier is in every part of the world, and sadly, some places such as Cambodia and India and other places, you also have this thing called sex tourism, where you have people from the West coming into those areas and abusing people in that context. So it's a very, very complex issue. But as you're both working on this, what are some of the key concerns that you see around this issue, or key trends that you're seeing as this issue has been, developing and expanding, really, sadly to say? What are some key concerns and some key maybe trends that you see? Maybe I'll start with you, Shane, in terms of what you're doing on the local level.
Well, my concern is that there wouldn't be a supply if there wasn't a demand, and it seems like there's more of a demand to have sex with younger kids, and that scares the hell out of me as a father with kids, and I think a lot of that is due to the access to online pornography and the addiction, and so that society and culture and accepting that kind of stuff. Shows that I've seen that are being accepted, things that concerns me right there. Is there needs to be some type of a culture shift, which is on education and people saying no to certain type of things. Shows that might they don't command. It's just frustrating, to think about some of these things that are accepted nowadays, and then pedophiles starting to become a cool thing or accepted in some circles. So that is a major concern to me, and more people need to step up and say, no, this is completely wrong, and there needs to be a moral line in the sand.
Yeah, huge points there. First of all, there's a lot of great work that's being done on this topic of sort of the sexualization of our world, really, and how exploitation on various levels, not just sexual exploitation, has become sort of rampant. But it's fueled in part by what you mentioned, Shane, sort of media images, whether it's movies, whether it's television, whether it's just what we're seeing every day in advertising. There has this been this shift, as you mentioned, and we're seeing younger and younger people and younger images of sexualization, and so that's been a really difficult thing. And pedophilia has become a much bigger issue, as you know. Here in the United States, we have the Epstein case and other cases like that really showed sort of the depth and breadth of this, horrible concern. Sarah Symons, I want to bring you into this same, sort of comment and question. When you're talking about this issue and we're talking about the complexity, what do you think are some of those key concerns or trends that you're seeing that you really think that we need to be focused on this topic?
I think one key trend that's happening in India, and I think in other places too, is that the trafficking is becoming a bit more dispersed. And online. It is still happening in red light areas, and where you have lots of girls together, but it's also more and more one girl off here and one over there. And so it's much, much harder for law enforcement or rescue agencies to find people. And I think just being aware of that. I loved what Shane said about just saying no yourself to like media that is sexualizing children or objectifying women or is, sexually violent. Like that isn't any kind of entertainment, please. Like, can we just stop pretending that's like entertainment to see all that stuff? If it's not a documentary, I think it's very strange how much rape and sexual violence is showing up in a very common way in so much media. And I think there's something a bit titillating about it. And I think that is a problem and a trend that I'm concerned about. The other thing, I don't know if I can exactly call it a trend because I think it's been with us forever, but I think it's something to be aware of, is that the people that are trafficked the most are people who are already in some ways invisible to us. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but a lot of times, like when a town is having like a human trafficking awareness event or something like that, the image will always be of a girl with long blonde hair. And it's not that girls with long blonde hair don't get trafficked, but let's be honest, they are the minority of trafficking victims. Trafficking is much more likely to affect kids of color, indigenous kids in the United States and everywhere. Tribal groups and ethnic minorities are targeted so much more. So why is it that the long blonde hair image is so popular? Is because that's the person that's considered the most important to save, and the most visible. And there's a huge problem with trafficking of indigenous women, missing and murdered indigenous women. Huge problems. Finally coming to light. People are talking about it, thank God, but it was silent for a long time because that's a group that's kind of in the shadows. So I think we need to stop otherizing certain groups and, everyone be equally valued and important and special in our society, so that when any person is trafficked, it is equally important as long blonde hair girl.
Yeah, really great point, Sarah. And one of the interesting things here in Colorado, when we've had opportunities to talk about this issue, people ask, who are these people? And I would answer on both ends, whether it's the victim or whether it's the perpetrator, that it's everybody around us, right? So sometimes we have these images, as you mentioned, Sarah, maybe it's the blonde image or maybe it's something, but you have these images of what a victim looks like or what a perpetrator looks like. But the reality is the perpetrators can be anybody. It could be the person at the grocery store. It could be the clerk at the grocery store. I mean, it really is something that can be that pervasive. And that's what makes it so difficult to address. But I think that as we're addressing this, one of the points you made, Sarah, I think is important, and that's this idea of online. So cyber trafficking has become an increasingly troubling issue. Now, Sarah, you've been working with people who have been rescued out of brothels and people who have been abused in those ways, but there are people sort of in the shadows in these cyber crimes. And I was wondering if both of you could maybe talk a little bit about that in terms of what you see as a concern there, or what do you think maybe contributes to that? I'll start with you, Shane.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of work specifically where I'm handling things like that, but I work with people that are, and there's scary stories. There's stories of TikTok, and you have a 13-year-old girl. I can't believe the followers that follow me on TikTok, like 8-year-old kids. But you have a 13-year-old girl who befriends people on TikTok. She's got major issues. Maybe she's getting molested by her father at home, or there's just, bad home environment. But and then so she befriends, something happens at home. Who's she going to go to? She's going to go to the friend on TikTok who might pose as a girl. Well, meet me at the mall. I'll buy you some food and we'll talk. I'll take care of you. And I'm going to have my boyfriend with me. That's it. Gone. Stuff like that happens in LA. It happens all over the place. So when I hear stories like that, it's like my girls, they don't have no cell phone. Not right now. That ain't going to happen until they're mature enough, and then there's safeguards. And we as parents, we think that, especially domestically in America, we're not going to allow pornography in our house, where our whole family can see it. But we're giving them access online to communicate with anybody who could be a complete predator and someone that does not care about them at all.
Yeah, powerful. Yeah, I think it's looking at all of these different tools that we have, right? We have all these technological advancements. We use our cell phones. We're on this wonderful sort of video conference, but all of these same tools that we use for good can be used for bad. And I think that's one of the concerns that we have to be really focused on in fighting human trafficking is how can the resources and tools that we have for good be used for bad, and how do we prevent that? Sarah Symons, let me bring you into the same thing. As you're looking at these issues of the cyber stuff and what's going on digitally, what are some of the comments that you have in terms of the roots of that and what we might do to address that?
Well, I really, again, like Shane, don't do a ton of work in that area or people who have experienced that kind of thing. But I do feel that if, to teens, if they just hear it from their dad, they won't believe it. If they just hear it from school or they just heard it at church youth group, but what if you got the same message in all of those places? Friends, and that there was really better awareness for kids to understand the risks and to understand how to protect themselves and their peers through education and awareness, and that was more discussed in all of those places and lots of other places. I think that would be very powerful for kids. So I think having them have the awareness, but as Shane said, if they're, they've been abused or they're feeling, just incredibly unloved and they have no other resources, no matter what awareness they have, they're going to turn, to places for love where they think they can get love. So I think it's also about making sure we have more resources for the most vulnerable kids who've already experienced incest or sexual abuse, kids in the juvenile justice system, as I said, foster kids, so that they both have the awareness and they have another option where they're going to be able to go and get love and support. There is a great group out there working specifically on this issue. It's called Acorn. And I've seen some of their work, and they trap pedophiles online and they run all kinds of stings working with law enforcement. It's really cool, if your sort of passion is around technological solutions, it'd be something good to check out.
Great resource. I also want to talk a little bit about, these different age groups. We talked about the fact that young children can be, abused and are particularly vulnerable, to pedophiles and predators that are online. But we also have issues with other age groups. When we talk about college age, where, young women are independent or maybe, having financial concerns, there's all sorts of things that happen in that context. And there's also gateway issues, right, to human trafficking. For example, there's strip clubs, there's prostitution, and all of those are gateway issues. And you both know that in our society, there's a lot of debate and discussion of what's permittable and permissible and what's lawful. And I just want to get your comments. Maybe I'll start with Sarah this time on these gateway issues and how we might address, kind of what they can potentially cause in terms of the larger human trafficking, issue.
Well, I think, I've kind of said it a bunch of times in this conference that it very rarely happens in a vacuum. There's always a vulnerability or a gateway. And so I think in order to prevent it, we need to get in there sooner. And when we see those vulnerabilities happening, addressing those so that we're not always, dealing with it after the fact. But then once the person has been trafficked and rescued, again, a long and strong focus on core causes. Just rescuing people and sending them back out isn't likely to be very effective for really breaking the chains of slavery and of intergenerational violence. So I think it's about taking a long range view and addressing root causes both before and after the fact of trafficking.
Yeah, great. And Shane, do you want to also share about, sort of, how we address these sort of gateway concerns or even these things that we think are okay in society, but really lead to something worse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough question because I think it's a moral question. Personally, I just feel like, obviously what Sarah says, with education, but morally, there's a lot of things that are being accepted now. And so how do you change that? That's a hard issue to deal with. How do you, some people might say it, watching a documentary of transgender kids, underage kids, is informal. I don't want to watch it personally. I can't force my opinion or my morals on other people. So I have to, that's part of why I'm doing the projects that I'm doing is hopefully I'm influencing culture in one small step in my network of influence. Is I'm a man, I'm a husband, I'm a father that believes this issue is wrong. Here's a step of action that I'm taking. But I also do know, after I've been doing this work about 12 years, is that I have friends that follow me on social media that have been trafficked and rescued. They're in the process of being restored, and they still have issues, but they see the work I'm doing and taking that step. And because it also says that, the name of this art installation is Can You See Me? But to them, wow, one person sees me or two people see me. People do care. People are standing up. And I think that's it. I think it's our culture. I think it's people taking a stand and going, we need to stop this. We need to change this. Because there's so much to say. I mean, what Sarah is bringing up, it's like counseling and trauma, dealing with the trauma, getting healing and wholeness through that. And how honest can we be in the beginning to let people know, okay, this is the road that this is going to take you.
Well, you both. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, Shane had mentioned earlier about like you take one step and then the next step becomes clear to you. And if everyone, who's listening to this broadcast, who felt moved about it, started taking a step, 5 or 10 years from now, thousands of people would have been rescued or not trafficked in the first place because of the efforts of just the people listening to this conference today. And I think, you don't know what to do at first. I had absolutely no idea, no skill, no idea. And, I just reached out by, with a couple emails and then started volunteering and then started working on one aspect of the issue and then learned about others and met other people. The same will happen for all of you. If you felt moved by what you heard, if you felt, excited about what was happening, take that first step and it will lead to clarity about what the next step is. And yeah, 5 or 10 years from now, the world will look completely different.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, Sarah, to sort of my next question, which is, what the community can do. I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that you all are doing and then translate that to our community. Now, Shane, earlier Sarah mentioned the fact that we have all these population groups that are particularly vulnerable, and she particularly mentioned the Native American community. And Shane, you've done some work on Native populations. Do you want to share a little bit about that work that you're doing, and then we can sort of expand out to some other ways that the community can engage?
Well, sure, yeah, and I have not yet. We are working on that. There are 2 different reservations that are in California alone that we're in talks with doing something. One was a fire where they lost their whole reservation due to fire, and then also the other one is trafficking and domestic violence. But one of the art installations that we're working on now through the foundation is it's an issue called Forgotten Flowers, and I believe it's South Dakota and parts of Arizona with the Navajo tribe, and it's also other tribes where kids just disappear and nobody cares. Nobody looks for them. So why, if you're a pedophile, if you're somebody that's making money off of trafficking, no matter what that is, why, I mean, you would go there to steal kids, take kids, because no one cares, no one follows up, no one does anything, there's no press, no media, and that just breaks my heart. And so the team with our organization, we're just like, how can we do this? So we got to find an organization out there to partner with. What kind of art installation can we create to bring awareness to this whole issue of forgotten flowers?
Yeah, powerful. And, one of our audience members also mentioned another organization that is reaching younger audiences. And it's a foundation that was created by a couple of, key advocates, Noah Centineo, Josh Heller, and Paul Layton. And their whole work is really focused on, this community, but with an emphasis on younger generations, and it's called Favored Nations. And so this is yet another way for people to learn. When we have opportunities like this type of forum, not only are you learning from the people that are here and presenting, but we have audience members that have wonderful resources and information as well. So we'd love to engage. So let's go back to our question about how the community can engage, how the community can work on this issue. You know, let's think about different categories of community members. Parents, we have educators, we have church ministry leaders, we have people in the business community, we have people in the arts community, in the advocacy community. So there's so many different layers when we say community member, right? So Sarah, you know, whether it's one or all of those, if you were going to share some input in terms of how community members can help address this issue, what are some of those recommendations that you make? Got your audio.
Yeah, sorry. I would say, you know, it starts by maybe making a decision as a community. So let's say, you know, you're in a book group or, you know, a youth group or your parent group or whatever it is, but starting with like, okay, let's get together and have some education around this, you know, and maybe they can connect with Global Justice or another organization to get, you know, someone to present and speak and, you know, read some books about the subject and just everybody kind of understand what's happening. And then I would really encourage, you know, and someone has to take the lead to make this happen, but for groups to take maybe one local issue or organization that they partner with and maybe one international, because it's all interlinked. We're all brothers and sisters. And you know, start figuring out where, you know, your gifts meet the world's need, you know, with those two partners or two organizations or efforts. And it really is broad. You know, you can create art about it. You can do accounting for it. You can raise money. Obviously, everybody needs money. And you can work locally with high-risk kids. And, you know, some people are doing that and in really creative and cool ways and bringing them in. But I think it's about, you know, having the will. I always say start by starting and, you know, deciding, okay, let's learn about this. And then as a group, as a sub community, what can we do about it? We have some amazing church partners, like one church in Connecticut, we were building a shelter and the kids independently, this was their own idea, made like a physical model of the shelter out of like cardboard and clay and stuff. And then, you know, sort of like auctioned off all the pieces until they built the whole thing. And it was all their idea. And they raised like $12,000 and they continue to sponsor kids at that shelter for their education and care. And I just think it's amazing, you know, what groups can do and what people can do when they come together with the will to do it.
That's great insight. And Shane, what would you share for these individual community members, whether it's a parent, an educator, a church group leader? What are some practical ways that they can help address this issue?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sarah. I think for me, again, I got to go back to being an artist. It's my passion. So how can you use your passion? And like Sarah said, it's following that passion. And you can create artwork, donate it to organizations that are fighting this cause and to help raise funds for different foundations that are doing the work. You know, you could do murals, you can, and it's not just art. Art can be filmmaking. It could be making music, spoken word. So I'm a firm advocate for using your creative gifts in the arts to help these organizations in any way you can.
Yeah, and I want to reinforce what both of you have shared. For our community members that are watching, you know, you are all of those people. Some of you are parents, some of you are students, some of you are teachers, some of you are business leaders. Whatever identification you have, we are all advocates against this issue. And one of the things we want to underscore is this idea that it takes all of us. And to give some perspective to this, you know, this issue, we have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations doing amazing work on this topic all over the world. And yet this topic has increased everywhere. And I think both Sarah and Shane have highlighted some of those reasons. Vulnerabilities have increased in many different segments, whether it's because you are poor, whether it's because you're a person of color, whether it's an intersection of poverty and race, whether it's people who have been forgotten or maybe are not seen. Shane's artwork really highlights that, you know, can you see me? Sometimes that's the first question, is seeing who's around. People who are depressed, people who are facing addictions, these are all vulnerabilities. And so we need to be, you know, very keenly aware. The second thing is to also realize what's around you in terms of resources. So Sarah's organization is a resource to us. We can see what they're doing to help these individuals in Asia. There are similar organizations working here in the United States. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, it's both and. We do not want to make the mistake of saying that, oh, we should work only in the United States when there's so many issues here, when the reality is the United States has an influence in these other areas as those other areas influence us. Shane Grammer really highlighted the fact that you can use your passions and gifts. Not everyone needs to start a new advocacy organization, and I want to really emphasize that. Maybe it's just being exactly where you are, helping that student, doing your artwork, providing supports to things. Michaela Williams is the wonderful artist that did the spoken word for Shane's video, and to partner with Shane made that video that much more powerful. So, it's just sometimes helping in those ways. So our point today in having this conversation with Sarah and Shane is to really emphasize to our community how human trafficking is all of our effort and all of our concern. I want to take this next few minutes just to thank Sarah for her amazing work with Her Future Coalition. You can find out more about them at their website, herfuturecoalition.org. You can also order her brand new book on Amazon or other sources. And you also can visit us at the Global Market to get a variety of beautiful, handmade, and exquisite jewelry that supports these survivors. Shane Grammer, you can visit and learn more about Shane through his work, not only at Shane Grammer Arts, but also through his new foundation, Hope Through Arts. And we also can check out his social media platforms and other areas so that you can see what he's doing next. This beautiful work that he shared with us today will be also on our website at globaljusticeonline.org. And we look forward to many, many more people sharing that wonderful video and these beautiful images with many others so that they can be inspired. This session that we've had today is really a start of a conversation with many advocates in our community and around the globe. And we hope that you'll share this with many. This session will be recorded and will be placed on our website, so you can visit it and you can share it with others that may have missed this live broadcast. If you're here in the live audience, we want to thank you so much for joining us and taking some time to learn about these great advocacy organizations and the topics that we've discussed today on human trafficking, not only what it is, but how we can make a difference. So with all of that, we say thank you, God bless you, and join us again for this continued effort to bring hope and a future to victims and to survivors of human trafficking. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Shane. Thank you to our audience. Bye all.
Thank you.